Hey everybody, welcome to EthStaker Community Call number 42. We are here with Wander from NodeSet and a whole lot of the EthStaker community. EthStaker Community Call number 42. We are here with
Uh-oh.
Okay, so we have the EthStaker team here, and we also have some guests, some honored guests here, and we have Wander from NodeSet, and I'll let him introduce himself after a minute. But first, I want to do some EthStaker housekeeping. I am transitioning out of EthStaker, and so these calls will be hosted by different hosts in the future. We're going to do some rotating hosts for a while. We're going to do a lot of community calls in the next few weeks. If you have an idea for a community call or want to suggest something or host something, please come into the EthStaker Discord, suggest it, offer to host it, add some questions. And if you have any questions for the upcoming calls, please drop them in the Discord or on our subreddit. You can see all of the upcoming community calls at ethstaker.cc/events. For this call, Ken Smith is going to be the host, so I'm going to pass it off to him, and he can introduce. You can ask Wander to do introductions, and then take it from here, Ken.
Thank you very much, Nixo. And first, before we move on, congratulations on your new opportunity with the EF. It's well deserved, and I'm looking forward to seeing everything that you do in the future here.
Thanks very much.
But good day, everyone. I'm Ken Smith. I'm a member of EthStaker and a longtime member of the Rocket Pool community, and I'm very glad to be the guest host on today's episode here. And joining us is Mike or Wander from NodeSet. Wander, good to talk to you again.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you all having me. Number 42 is incredible. I don't think NodeSet is the meaning of life, the universe, and everything, but maybe some people will find it interesting, at least.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to learning a little bit about that. And I guess I should probably put a disclaimer out here that I've had the opportunity to know Mike for quite a while. And we met up at HodlerCon meetup and in the Rocket Pool Discord. And I've had the opportunity to be one of the early investors in NodeSet. So this is a especially important call for me here because I get to learn a little bit about the protocol in a little bit more level of detail. But Mike, let's start off and just have you introduce a little bit about your background and who you are. And then after that, if you could give us a little bit of an introduction to what NodeSet is. I think a lot of people have heard of it, but they don't know exactly what it is.
Absolutely. So, yeah, a little bit about my background. I've been a software engineer for about 15 years and mostly worked in the emerging technology is sort of my passion in general. So I've worked in VR, I worked in mobile gaming when that was sort of, at the peak of its hype, which, if you're old enough to remember, that was like in the early 20 teens. So I've been doing, basically whatever the most interesting technology is out there at the time. I resisted going into AI because I was so into crypto. So I couldn't extract myself from crypto to go follow that. That's cool. But it's at a certain point, you just kind of have to say, well, I'm really into this one thing and it's going really well. So anyway, I've been a software engineer for a very long time and I've seen a lot of different, things come and go. I think one thing that still actually a lot of folks, talk about Ethereum and Bitcoin and crypto as like, okay, well, that's all old hat. Like, maybe, NFTs, they kind of came and went. It's all just a fad or whatever. I think the complete opposite. I think we're, very, very, very early. And because of that, I look around the landscape that we have today and, a few years ago, like Ken mentioned, I met him in person for the first time at HodlerCon in Hawaii, as well as a number of other folks on this call. And I also met Nick, the co-founder of NodeSet. He unfortunately can't join us today. He has a conflict, but the two of us both have the same outlook ultimately. I'm kind of backing up a couple of years to Hawaii. We've been talking for a while, trying to get some similar ideas off the ground, but running into the same problem. Ultimately, Ethereum and Web3, the entire blockchain infrastructure that exists is missing a few key components, we believe. One of the biggest things that needs to exist that doesn't is a network of decentralized infrastructure that is generalized and can be used, independently of any in particular task, right? So new tasks can plug into this existing network to have new kinds of compute done. The key for this is Ethereum does this, already, but it's relatively rudimentary, I would say, and it's very technical. You have to know how to program in Solidity in order to get your tasks defined, essentially. And there's a lot of constraints with that. What NodeSet wants to do is change that to make things easier. So what we've done is we've created a large cohort of node operators. Anyone can join. It's free to join. We don't really gatekeep. The only requirement is you have to be a real human being. So if you go to nodeset.io/join, you can join our cohort of node operators, and we'll do the very best we can to connect you with computing opportunities, which will pay you for your time and effort to do some compute. And this can be anything from providing some storage, to helping with consensus, to staking for somebody who wants to stake their Ethereum but doesn't want to run a node. So that's what brings us to the place where NodeSet is today.
Okay, perfect. And I guess one of the questions I hear a lot from folks is recognizing that you were kind of born out of maybe the Rocket Pool community. How does NodeSet differ from Rocket Pool? Can you help explain that, especially with the launch of Constellation that you'll be talking about here?
Absolutely. So Rocket Pool is very near and dear to our hearts. This philosophy that we have of trying to empower independent node operators, which I'll be talking a lot about, I'm sure, is something that can apply, we think, to pretty much everything in this industry. It is not going to be an easy path. Right now, the industry is built around centralized players. However, Rocket Pool is actually one of the few protocols that's not that way. So it actually empowers independent operators as is in a permissionless fashion. There are some limitations on this due to the crypto economics of Rocket Pool. You have to, bring your bond, and of course, you also have to know how to run a node. But Rocket Pool is, inherently a really interesting protocol to build on top of for a network like ours, because it already enables this kind of thing to happen. We just want to break down those barriers even further. So when we came from the Rocket Pool community, I was an early contributor to Rocket Pool. I wrote a lot of the early RPIPs, and Nick and I both have been a part of the Rocket Pool community for forever. One of the things that we noticed with Rocket Pool, though, is that it's a two-sided marketplace, and we can talk a little bit more about this later. But one of those sides is bottlenecked. Like I said, it's all permissionless, so it's already kind of enabling anyone in the whole world to go ahead and fix this problem. But it's sort of a coordination issue ultimately, and that's ultimately what NodeSet does, right? Is we help coordinate node operators to tackle large problems that any individual would have a hard time doing. So pooling these efforts together makes it so that independent operators can continue to survive and thrive in the world ahead, rather than centralizing market forces pushing them out. So the goal for what we built initially with Constellation is to expand Rocket Pool. We built something on top of Rocket Pool, not part of it, but what we call an L2. And it's sort of in some ways similar to the L2s that live on top of Ethereum.
Oh, interesting there, Mike. In that, I guess the interesting thing here, I guess, is maybe I'm hearing an expansion of NodeSet, right, where it's really focusing on maintaining this distributed set of node operators. What are your future visions for NodeSet? I mean, how many node operators do you want, and how many partners do you have?
That's a great question. We actually have quite a few different partners, and many of them are not announced. We're sort of in this point where we're a very small dev team, and we really don't want to be focused on too many things at once, because otherwise we'll drop the ball on whatever is in front of us. But we do have a lot of plans, and we're very excited to be adding more and more capabilities to the NodeSet network. We have currently about 270 registered node operators, and they're all obviously independent. We have gone through and simple checked everybody. We don't know everybody's name, address, or anything like that. It's a completely, it can be completely anonymous if you'd like for it to be, except for the fact that we need to see you on camera and you need to answer some questions about, how you run your node, just to ensure that you're a real person who can actually run an Ethereum node. In the future, we may even drop some of those requirements, and allow you access to certain services that we provide that maybe don't require civil protection or not as deep civil protection. And then there might be on the other end of the spectrum, there may be some partners that we work with that require like full KYC, for example. And not everybody has to do that; it would be optional, right? So the expanded vision for NodeSet, we have about 100 operators in the queue right now to go through the application process. And it's likely that when we release, every product that we release, we see a huge influx of new node operators. So we just went to testnet with Constellation, which is essentially the product release for us on our side of the equation, because we're not actually releasing that on mainnet as a product of our own. We don't like, but we're an infrastructure company, so we don't really do DeFi, protocols. We don't put things out there and advertise them and say like, yeah, come mint this thing. Instead we're an infrastructure aggregation organization. So we partner usually with folks. If we developed something then that we think is interesting for the world to see, then typically we're going to put it out there as open source, and have those folks, some other partners out there, utilize it in a non-exclusive fashion, right? So ideally with NodeSet infrastructure built in, but technically they can do whatever they want. We want to make the ecosystem stronger, and that's our way of doing that. So the goal for NodeSet, to answer your first question very directly, how many node operators do we want? I think a success scenarios for NodeSet already is what we have, hundreds of node operators who are high quality, doing their job great, across multiple services. The goal from here is to take it from, bare minimum success to, really making sure that the industry at large understands the value of a large decentralized network of infrastructure like this and growing it even further. So another big goal for us is to be trying to hit 500, 1,000, 1,500, right? At a certain point, we're probably not going to be able to outpace Ethereum's nodes. That's going to be very difficult to do. Most folks on Ethereum running nodes are probably running multiple nodes, so it's going to get very difficult at a certain point. But we don't really have a limit on it. This isn't Lido. We don't want to say, okay, there's only this number of operators and those operators are in a committee and get to choose the other people in it. We don't have some small subset of the services that we provide are available to the public. It's everybody. Don't want to hate on Lido too much because they are attempting to open up a little bit, which is great. It's a good step in the right direction. But that's fundamentally not the approach that we take. We want more node operators all the time. Doesn't matter how many we have, we'll take more. It's free, it's good, it's healthy for the Ethereum ecosystem. So our hope is to continue to grow indefinitely.
Sort of a follow-up question to that one, relating to the kinds of partnerships you have. So I see you've got already kind of 3 key partners in Rocket Pool and Gravita and Stakewise. Like, how do you define the boundary lines between your role and your partner's role? Like what is each person's responsibilities, and how do you set up the partnerships to make sure that both you and the partner are contributing and benefiting from the partnership?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, we have some specific advisors that help us, with the strategic partnership portion of our business strategy, because this is something that we knew from the very start was going to be a crucial area of business for us. It was an absolute requirement that we get that part right, because like I mentioned, we definitely don't want to be a DeFi company that's going out there and, or at least at the moment, we definitely don't have the resources for that. We're a US based entity, and everyone knows how difficult the regulatory situation is in the United States right now surrounding the questions around securities and things like that. So we don't really want to deal with any of those questions. And there are plenty of people out there in the world that are offering fantastic crypto products to an international audience, and those are great partners for us to provide infrastructure to, without having to worry too much about the do's and don'ts of the U.S. legal situation. So from a very specific perspective, we basically have two different types of strategic partners that we work with. And you named three different partners that we have. Stakewise and Rocket Pool fall into the first category, and those are our developer partners, basically people who we work with to either we or they will build some kind of integration into the NodeSet network. And that integration services some part of their product that they feel could be improved with decentralized infrastructure. Sometimes we will build it because we see an opportunity there, and sometimes they'll build it. So in the case of Stakewise, we actually also, and Rocket Pool in both of these cases, we also partnered with a second type of partner, which I alluded to before. Gravita is our DeFi partner in this space. And Gravita is actually the one that is releasing products, marketing them to their users, and getting it out into the world. So we are not necessarily, DeFi experts. We do know quite a bit about it, obviously, but Gravita has significantly more expertise when it comes to incentives and liquidity arrangements, and where all the action is happening on the markets and things like that. And ultimately, our expertise is in providing infrastructure and managing our decentralized network. So, and of course, just developing that infrastructure as well. So that's the line. There's, it is, it may seem a little blurry, if you don't dive into it too deeply, but we do have a pretty defined set of relationships that are in place. NodeSet is officially a service provider to Gravita for their products, and from on the opposite side of the equation, there's no defined relationship, legally speaking, at least, with Rocket Pool and Stakewise, and they are absolutely very supportive of our efforts, of course. And we have a lot of other partners in this space that we're working with. Nothing that I can announce today, unfortunately, but those folks, it kind of will operate in a similar manner where they support our development efforts or we support their development efforts. And infrastructure is, sort of coming online through the development side of the things. And there will be some sort of other DeFi component that actually, provides an interface to users.
I guess in my head, I see you guys as being a lot of kind of a connector or a middleman. Like you go out and you find partners to bring in the money, and then you find partners to place the money with node operators and stakers. So are you continuing to develop those kinds of new partnerships at the staker level? I mean, there's certainly been a number of smaller initiatives, test initiatives going on with like OBOL and the Lido CSV and SSV, all these different things that are looking to help stakers find new sources. Are you kind of looking at growing those types of partnerships as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really crucial to us to be platform agnostic. We think that the value of an aggregated infrastructure layer like ours is not going to be in picking and choosing who wins. There is a real benefit to all of our independent operators that work with us if we provide them as many opportunities as possible. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's not necessarily just going to be, we do this one thing in staking and then we move on, right? We actually, we come from the staking world. We're very experienced in staking. We know a lot about how it works, both economically and technically. So Ethereum staking is probably always going to be the bedrock of our corporate strategy to some extent. And we have a goal long-term to move away from staking as well. And we have a lot of really fantastic, there's some really cool stuff happening internally and, with stuff that I can't talk about, unfortunately, but I think we're seeing a lot of really exciting demand for things outside of staking as well. But yeah, there's a lot still left to be done in staking, right? And then there's the whole restaking world is a whole, that's a whole thing too. AVSs, obviously, they could probably use some decentralization. So, our goal is to be a neutral layer that people can go to instead of saying, oh, I need infrastructure, I need nodes. I'll go to Kiln or a testnet or whatever, right? And, just use one of these big providers. It's not a bad option, but there's Lido has a link that references all of their incidents. And it's unfortunate that happens. I mean, they lose millions of dollars when one of these centralized entities goes down. So obviously they do the best they can to try and maintain high quality of service, but nothing is going to beat a decentralized network in terms of resilience.
So, Mike, I wonder if you can maybe talk a little bit about Constellation. And the question that is posed here is, what value does NodeSet add to the Rocket Pool protocol with Constellation?
Yeah, so I'll go back to that two-sided marketplace analogy I mentioned before. So the way the Rocket Pool works is it's a liquid staking protocol. One of the two decentralized permissionless staking protocols out there, actually. The other being Stakewise. So we support both of them. And with Rocket Pool, the model is such that you, as a liquid staker, purchase RETH or exchange your Ether for RETH with the protocol, and then that is using their smart contracts permissionlessly, non-custodially distributed to node operators, who will run that for you, and then that those the validators will return Ether rewards, and then comes back to you, and you pay a small commission to the node operators. I mean, this all sounds great, right? Most people listening to this will probably already know how Rocket Pool works or how an LST will work. But Rocket Pool has one big problem, and this is something that Nick and I noticed very early on, many years ago, shortly after Rocket Pool's launch, that there is another side of the equation that is kind of a big damper on the growth of Rocket Pool. If for crypto economic reasons, it can't be permissionless unless the node operators also have something at stake to lose if something goes wrong. So with Rocket Pool's case, the node operators have to bond 8 Ether, at least 8 Ether, and at least 2.4 Ether worth of RPL, which is their utility/governance token. And of course, as you kind of add these requirements, the Venn diagram of people in the whole world that are willing to do that and capable of doing that, right, gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So, you really, I just listed 3 requirements. You have to run a node and know how to do that, run a staking node and a Rocket Pool node, no less, which is a little different. It's in some ways easier, and in some ways it's a little bit more complex. But you also have to have 8 Ether. And you also have to have 2.4 Ether worth of RPL, at least to get started. So the number of people in the whole world that have all these things and they're interested in doing this, have the skills, the capability, et cetera, it's vanishingly small. So at a certain point, there's a pretty high demand for RETH, because RETH being their liquid staking token, in a lot of ways, it's a very decentralized, highly utilitarian token compared to some of the others. It's slashing protected, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of people really like it, and I do too. I think it's a fantastic idea. But on the other end of things, the node operators, the number of node operators is limited. So what we've done with Constellation is gone through some considerable pain and effort to develop a protocol on top of Rocket Pool that will liquidize the bond for node operators and distribute that bond non-custodially to node operators using our smart contract system called Constellation, and exposes those 2 things as liquid staking tokens themselves, which we call XRETH and XRPL. And they have some unique properties, but we can get into that a little bit.
Excellent in there and for it. And so is the thought that with the launch of Constellation, that liquidity problem. I think this came up in a number of Vitalik's posts and some research from EthStaker, which seems to be that of those three things, the technical know-how and then the capital know-how, it's really the capital barrier that I think we're encountering with. And that's the ideal, is that you'll break down that capital barrier there.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, if you want to frame it in terms of capital versus technical, currently in the Rocket Pool land, the people who have the technical capability are not being given the capital to there's a lot of capital demand, but it's being bottlenecked by the system not assigning it to these people. So oftentimes we get folks, when we get to this point in the conversation, a lot of folks ask questions like, well, why is this not built into Rocket Pool itself? Which is a great question, right? And actually, if you are really into the Rocket Pool community, and you probably already know the answer to this, but very, very early on in their development, Rocket Pool had a concept like this, but it ended up being scrapped because they did not want to introduce any kind of permissioning system. And without doing that, you can't really guarantee that it's a fair system. So the crypto economic element of Rocket Pool with the bond, ultimately ensures that the node operators are performing adequately. And it doesn't really matter whether they're specific individuals or not. What NodeSet has done is added a light layer of permissioning to ensure that when we pay for that bond, well, it's not we, but when XRETH and XRPL holders pay for that bond for node operators, the node operators' incentive to act correctly is now only dependent upon their future income, as part of the fees that they're getting. So there needs to be some layer of trust there ultimately. And, obviously there is something at stake that they have their future income that they could lose, but they also have the, there's a, when it comes to the idea that you have to get on camera and you have to like say who you are, even if it's a anonymous internet nickname or whatever, it of course weeds out a lot of bad actors. It doesn't eliminate absolutely everyone. I think generally speaking, Nick and I are optimists about the world. Most people don't want to just come in and wreak havoc. And we think that this system so far is doing a really good job of keeping out the people who just want to cause chaos. Requiring people to go through like a minimum level of effort and actually look at somebody, in the eye, like a real human being, even if it's virtually, prevents folks from all of those folks who just want to cause havoc. Oftentimes they just do it because it's super easy. They can just like hit a couple buttons on the keyboard, not talk to anybody, and then watch chaos unfold on the internet, right? But when you add, a human social layer to it, it actually stops a lot of people from acting maliciously. And of course, we can always kick people out if something bad happens, and then they would lose all their future income. So there's a number of different safeguards we have in place. But Rocket Pool doesn't do any of this. And of course, Rocket Pool doesn't want to do any of this. Rocket Pool is a permissionless protocol, and I support that completely. I think we need a permissionless base layer for staking. If you don't want to talk to somebody, if you can't talk to people, if you, just want to deal with bits and bytes, if you want to be completely anonymous, there are options for you. And I think that's a wonderful thing. But ultimately what NodeSet is doing is offering an optional additional way for you to monetize your reputation and use your reputation to earn more.
So you brought up some interesting topics around like people being able to step up and do the civil test and get on camera. What other kinds of criteria you have for node operators? What do you expect from them beyond doing that test, and how do you make sure that they are good actors on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, so this is going to become much more complicated over time, but right now it's actually quite simple because we only serve Ethereum staking. So what we do is we require folks who come into our NodeSet cohort to prove that they own own is probably not the right word, to prove that they operate an existing Ethereum validator in some shape or form. So, technically speaking, the details for that are fairly simple. You just need to sign a message with your validator key, your private validator key. And, we can verify that it says, it could be really any message, but it'll, as long as we know what the message is supposed to decode to, it'll say, I want to join NodeSet or whatever. And we can look it up, and then we can look at your validator performance history, and we can verifiably know, okay, this person who is running this node on Ethereum wants to, or not just this node, but this validator on Ethereum wants to join NodeSet, and this is the performance that they have, et cetera, et cetera. So we have minimum performance criteria as well. We require, it's actually quite generous, I think. We require that folks maintain, first of all, that they have maintained a validator on Ethereum for at least 6 months. They don't have to do a very good job of it. But in the most recent 90 days, they need to have reached a 95% rating or better on rated.network. That's the current criteria that we use. We will probably refine that over time, but I think that's fairly generous. The network average is, I think, somewhere around 96. So it's a little bit, I mean, frankly, the differences between a 95% effective operator on rated.network and a 98% effective operator are pretty minimal, right? We're talking individual percentage points of income at that point. So it's crucial, in our opinion, to get as many people joining as possible. We don't really want to lower the bar too far, or else we'd be putting the capital at risk that is trusting the NodeSet network with its operations. But we think that this is like a good sort of middle ground at the moment, and we're of course always investigating new criteria to potentially apply, and whether we can refine these requirements, remove them, exchange them, etc. We'll probably do that over time. We would really like to have DBT implemented into our network at some point, which would allow us to reduce that requirement even further. And of course, outside of staking, none of that would apply. If we present some sort of data availability solution or storage capabilities or things like that, then a completely different set of requirements would be applying to those services.
I was going to ask a follow-up on that. I actually had a question on that 95% because it's funny. The Raver rating was the first time I heard that was in the docs of NodeSet. So I don't know. It's definitely really technical and seems really good to use. And I think maybe there's just more research on my own part around like how do you optimize that rating, because previously, just as from a personal experience, the effectiveness rating on something like Beacon Chain is what kind of my eye would always go to. But so it's funny because it felt like this new like kind of upping the technical awareness level, which I guess is a good thing. But so yeah, I get you kind of already answered the question a little bit, like why was that chosen? And how,
sure. Well, I can dive into
what's the
that a little bit, though.
Yeah, I'd be curious like how you chose that, and like also just like experience and skill level, and like kind of what kind of things you guys are looking for in that sense.
Yeah, so I'll start with the first part of like why Raver. Raver is the specific algorithm, for those who don't know, that rated.network uses, and it's actually a conglomeration of all of the different aspects of running a node or running a validator. So you have your proposals, your sync committees, attestation effectiveness rate. It goes down to attestation delays and things like that. So they weight all of these things using a custom algorithm, and they say, okay, well, realistically speaking, it's most important that you participate in your sync committee duties, because that's what earns the most money for a validator. And if you're failing that duty, then that's way worse than if you hit every attestation on time with no inclusion delays, but you miss your sync committee. So in that case, that's a good example of how the Raver score would be penalized very heavily, whereas the effectiveness score on Beacon Chain would not, because it's only measuring your attestation effectiveness. That said, Beacon Chain obviously does do a fantastic job of actually displaying all of this data. We just happen to use this aggregated method right now because it's quite simple on our end to just ping a single API. There are some technical nuances to it. You may disagree with the weightings that they've chosen, and I certainly think that it's not perfect, but it is, quote unquote, good enough for now, basically. We'll likely eventually, refine these criteria over time and become a little bit better. But to answer some of your other questions surrounding node operator eligibility, the kinds of experience we're looking for, things like that, it's actually quite open. We don't really do a whole lot of gating. We don't want to do gating. We really want to be biased in the direction of bringing people on, and then if they don't do a good job, kicking them out, because it's much better for us. We come from the perspective of there is a problem in Web3 and in Ethereum as a whole with centralization, and we want to help tackle that problem using the tools that we have available. Inclusion at a very fundamental level is what we're biased towards. And then if you prove yourself, ineligible because you can't maintain the quality of service that's necessary, then, we can manage that out essentially. And we can say, all right, well, we'll pause your eligibility for this particular service, but we also don't want to necessarily discourage people who might be kind of on the line from applying, because if you are on the line, then, obviously we have a hard cutoff, right? You have to maintain those criteria in terms of the Raver score for the prior 3 months and whatnot. But if you kind of are on the line, you make it in and we accept you, and then you actually, start running some NodeSet validators, and then you can't maintain that quality of service. We don't want to necessarily just, axe you forever, right? Like that's it. Our goal is not to be hyper exclusive. What we would do is instead just sort of pause it and say, okay, well, at the moment, it seems like you're having difficulty meeting the quality of service that's necessary. So what we'll do is we'll just leave your account inactive for now. But when we get another service, or when we upgrade our technology stack internally to use dbt, for example, or any of the other opportunities that we might have available in the future, you'll be able to, try again, essentially. We don't want to turn people away. So we bias towards, being inclusive, and then sort of saying, okay, well, it's not working right now if necessary. And then, we can always reverse that decision later, or, make things easier for people. So that's kind of the philosophy that we take. And what that leads to is, ultimately during these interviews that we have to civil check people, it's actually just it's not a job interview. It's not a, very deep technical sort of, full of gotcha questions or anything like that. You don't have to answer correctly. The main goal is to just ensure that you're a real person, because if somebody were to register at NodeSet with 20 different accounts, then they would get 20 times as much income. And although our network would continue to operate effectively, and I want to be clear that, that's not necessarily like a technical problem if that does happen, it is kind of unfair to the other node operators who are operating ethically. So we try to apply some sort of bare minimum, level of like, are you a real human? Are you different than other humans, right? And so, that's really the only requirement. We don't, 99% of the time, these interviews are actually just like fun chats with node operators, right? Because, you ask them like, so what hardware you're using? And then like, they just talk for days, right? Because they want to tell you all about their node setup, and everybody's really passionate about it. And honestly, it's actually a lot of fun to talk to, all these folks. And it's one of my favorite things about what we do.
Hey, Wonder, random question. I am a node operator. I'm interested in getting in participating in NodeSet. How do I go see my Raver score? Because if I go look at rated.network, I type in my public key, I see, I think NodeSet was a 6-month period, right? Over the last 6 months, or was it over the last 90 days?
You have to operate for at least 6 months. So you have to be online for 6 months. And then, the last 90 days, you'll need to exceed 95%. You'll just have to eyeball it for now.
Oh, okay. So there's no like dashboard I can go see what.
Not yet. We're working on it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Where can people go see that when you do publish it?
When that is live, we do have a NodeSet dashboard at nodeset.io/dashboard. But you can't really do anything unless you're a NodeSet operator right now. We are very, very focused on Constellation right now. That is our, #1 goal, and we're a small dev team, so we don't have a lot of extra resources to kind of pretty up our website or, add unnecessary quote unquote features to our dashboard. But we'll get there. That's, we're planning essentially that as our next big project for the web side of things, is to kind of just make the user experience a lot better. Right now it's literally bare minimum. Like, it's, you just go in and you're like clicking text links and, a random button to like register a node address and things like that. It's like, it doesn't really explain itself very well. So that's sort of our next goal, is to step things up from a UI perspective. But our first and foremost goal always is going to be to bring more opportunity to node operators. And if that means that we have to walk you through on Discord how to register your node and stuff like that with our systems, then I would rather do that than have you earning less in the meantime. So that's why we do it that way.
So
It's
Mike,
funny, 'cause it certainly seems like there's, maybe a longer term or medium term plan of building a whole pipeline of onboarding people and training them how to use it, and then sort of building them up, ranking them up to more sophisticated, larger staking volumes. I mean, that's probably not on your immediate pipeline if you're doing dev type work, but it's an interesting opportunity.
Absolutely. No, that's definitely the direction that we'd like to go. And it depends entirely upon, how much uptake we get with the services that we provide. And, we're really excited about Constellation. We think it's going to provide a really fantastic opportunity to all of the node operators we have in the system right now. And hopefully that sort of gets us to escape velocity, where we can, start to do more and more and more, right?
So Mike, you mentioned that new node operators, they have to have these criteria of being online for 6 months and having a specific Raver score for the preceding 90 days. But what do you do in the case of where somebody is already a node operator for NodeSet and then they have an underperforming node? What do you do with those individuals?
Yeah, and this is an unfortunate situation. Nobody wants to be there. Nobody tries to be a bad node operator. So we're really understanding of that. And so, like I said before, we'll just sort of put your account on pause. And what that means is, if you have a validator that you're running on behalf of NodeSet, we'll broadcast a pre-signed exit message that our software automatically sends to us when you've created that validator. So it's not a perfect solution right now, because theoretically, if you're a super hacker, you could use some modified version of our client to just not send a pre-signed exit message to us and then hold the capital hostage or something. But the withdrawal address will always be set to the NodeSet contracts. So there's not really ever going to be, a way to profit from that in any shape or form. But this is sort of a temporary measure until Pectra. And obviously after Pectra, we'll get, I guess EIP 7002 is no longer, it's been rolled into the max EB, but Pectra will allow us to have more sophisticated options on the smart contract side to sort of automatically exit validators rather than having to rely on these pre-signed exit messages. It's not a very ideal technical solution at the moment, but it's the best that the industry has ultimately. So there's 2 layers of that actually for Stakewise, because Stakewise ODAO has also requires pre-signed exit messages on hand. Rocket Bulls does not, but we hang on to those for Constellation.
Okay.
Beamy in the YouTube chat made a really good point, which is that an increasingly large set of node operators are Gnosis validators, because they're doing a really good job of creating a decentralized validator set. Would there be any potential targeting at Gnosis validated node runners? Maybe because I think the rated product doesn't support looking at Gnosis right now. And so would there be any way to measure their effectiveness?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we most likely would not onboard Gnosis node operators until we actually offered a Gnosis service that people could utilize. Now, Stakewise on Gnosis does exist. And we've sort of done some early exploration with the Gnosis DAO to consider an integration with the Gnosis ecosystem. It's not a huge lift of a project for us, but there are costs associated with it. So we have to kind of work through that and figure it out. But We would love to add support for Gnosis at some point if there's demand for it. We actually have a post up on the Gnosis forums, so I can post that in chat if people want to go there and like it or talk about it. It's a request for a grant so that we can integrate with the Gnosis ecosystem, and that would basically it's one better, right, than just onboarding existing Gnosis validators into our Ethereum validator set. It would sort of unify both of them, right? So it would allow our existing Ethereum validators to now run Gnosis nodes if there is demand for that on Gnosis, and vice versa, right? So it would kind of take away any technical barriers there at all. From a validation experience standpoint, I'm not aware of anything that is similar to Raver on Gnosis, but ultimately that data is available. So, we can always ping the network ourselves and get it. It's just a little more complicated. Eventually we'll want to do that kind of thing for Ethereum as well. And most likely because we'll want to get a little bit more granular than just a Raver score. But it's sort of the easiest and fastest path to bare minimum at the moment. So that will improve on Ethereum too.
So Mike, if somebody met these qualifications that you've discussed and wants to become a node operator with NodeSet, how do they start and what software do they need to run?
Yeah, so the fastest way to join is go to nodeset.io/join. And if you are not a NodeSet node operator, then you really should be. There's not really a reason not to be. You can always join and then not do anything if you don't feel like it. There's no requirements or anything like that. We're not going to kick you out if you just don't do anything. That's fine. You can just leave an account sitting in our database, and we're not going to punish you. You could use a throwaway email address. You could do whatever. So when it comes to the process for actually running nodes for NodeSet, this is one of my favorite pieces of technology that we've developed, and it's central to our long-term strategy. We have Joe Klappis is a ex-Rocket Pool engineer who has come to work with us, and he works on the smart node at Rocket Pool. So if you are unfamiliar with Joe, he's kind of a legend in the Ethereum community. He's run quite a few incredible things down the technology pipeline for Rocket Pool. And we're very, very happy to have him working with us now. What he's developing with us is sort of an expanded version of the Rocket Pool Smart Node Stack. And if you're unfamiliar with that, it's a node client ultimately that sort of wraps the Ethereum staking experience specifically for Rocket Pool, but it does it in a much more user-friendly way than I think ETH2 or ETH Docker or any of the other solutions out there make available. So it's much more akin to, it's not quite point and click. It's not quite that level of ease yet, but it is very specific to Rocket Pool. It does all your Ethereum client management for you. It does all the configuration and everything, and sets it all up behind the scenes. Kind of gives you warning messages if something isn't correct, right? It'll send transactions for you, all sorts of stuff. But the one big downside of the Rocket Pool Smart Node is that it is very specific to Rocket Pool, right? Naturally speaking. So one thing that we're doing is we're taking this concept and sort of generalizing it and expanding it to not just focusing on Rocket Pool, but focusing on any number of different services that NodeSet operators can use. So we call this piece of software, hyperdrive. And hyperdrive is, it's this node client software that we're developing that allows node operators to run multiple services side by side in a secure fashion using the same single mnemonic. So they only have to remember one mnemonic, or write it down and distribute it amongst your friends and family or whatever you do. But you only have to have the one, and you can regenerate all of your NodeSet state from that one mnemonic. So this software is, I think, really neat. You can go check it out. It's all GPL v3. We have Stakewise support already in our released version of this. Constellation, the Constellation support was added in a beta a couple days ago, and soon we'll be releasing the full version of the Constellation support for hyperdrive. And then, after that, we've got a lot of different, we call them modules right now. Eventually, they'll ideally even be packages where you sort of just, hyperdrive can be a package manager and you tell it, download this package, download that package. And, these are just new services that I can use and run locally. Right now, they're a little bit more built in than that. They're called modules, but it is a modular architecture. It's intentionally made to extend. It's specifically extensible so that we can add new features to hyperdrive really easily. And so we're really hoping in the near future to, and when I say near future, I don't mean like next week, so don't get too pumped, but we're hoping to add Ethereum solo staking support to it, as well as maybe if the Rocket Pool community is able to help us out with this, we would like to also make a secondary Rocket Pool client, or at least at minimum make it an integration for hyperdrive so that people can run Rocket Pool nodes as well. So those are just a couple of different things we have in the pipeline, but we have a lot of different other opportunities that we're going to be providing to node operators over time as well. And that will all go through hyperdrive. You load up hyperdrive, you install it. We have, a Debian repository. So if you're running a Debian machine, you can, add our repository to your apt sources list, and then say apt update, apt install hyperdrive -y, because nobody wants to actually press enter, and then go. There it is. It's on your machine. If you do apt get update, you'll always get the latest version of hyperdrive from our repository. We have a nightly dev builds repository. We have a beta one too. If you just want to get super technical about it, if you want to help us test, we would love to have people helping us out. But we also have just a regular releases one that's updated much more infrequently. It's a stable version. And so when you get that on your machine, you just run hyperdrive service config, and there's this beautiful terminal UI that will come up, and it will walk you through with a wizard, and it'll tell you, first you need to create an Ethereum client. Which network do you want to create your Ethereum client for, Holeshki or mainnet? Which client pair do you want to use? And then of course, by default, we care a lot about client diversity, so it will select something that is not a majority client by default. And then if actually, I think the default might be random. And then if the random selects a majority client, you'll get a warning that it'll say like, hey, you probably shouldn't use this.
Excellent.
How does it know what the majority client is?
That's a great question. We actually currently have to code it in. We just have to manually say like, all right, Prism is, over 30% or whatever.
Cool.
But yeah, eventually we'll probably plug it into some API somewhere. Most likely ETH Sunshine or something like that.
Well, Mike, as we start to wrap this call up here with the EthStaking community, are there any things that we haven't covered yet in today's episode that you feel it's important for the EthStaker community to know? And follow up to that, if they do want to find out more about NodeSet, how do they get a hold of you or learn more about the protocol? Where do they go?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to know about NodeSet is that, what we're doing is sort of a quiet importance to the industry. We think it's really critical, but it's also not something that people often are viewing as important. There's a lot of noise about client diversity. There's a lot of noise about geographic diversity and things like that, that's all great, but those things are ultimately serviced by decentralization. And if you increase the decentralization of your infrastructure, then you're going to get those things for free, and naturally speaking. So one of the biggest problems that I see, I don't think that a lot of people are actually really documenting this too much, but there is a high level of staking concentration amongst very specific entities that run across multiple networks. They're often the ones that sort of, they're the institutional providers. And I'm not going to hate on any of the institutional partners because they all do generally a very, very good job. But much like with Ethereum, much like with Bitcoin mining, it's a very centralizing market unless we find a better solution. And we believe NodeSet is the first step towards a better solution, providing a decentralized infrastructure service that can hook into anything, whether it's an eigenlayer AVS or an LST or Gnosis or Filecoin or whatever, right? So our hope is that long-term people will start to recognize that the Ethereum community is decentralized right now, but it may not always be, and it's not really trending in the right direction. But that's not a good thing, and that we should fix that by attempting to make better infrastructure. One thing that I think is kind of interesting about NodeSet is that we are much more effective from a cost standpoint than a centralized provider might be. And in large part, this is ultimately because we don't have big teams of engineers running lots of data centers. Instead, we have lots of passionate individuals out of their houses running all of this infrastructure and being paid to do so individually. And so each individual protocol doesn't actually have to pay quite a lot in order to get these people's time, because they're being paid by multiple protocols. Whereas these large centralized entities, they have large staff to support. They have to have huge amounts of allocation in order to sort of justify what they're doing. So we have some interesting economies of scale, and the hope is that over time we can grow to do something better. But if this is sort of a quiet problem in the Ethereum ecosystem, but I would love some help in amplifying it. I hope that people across the ecosystem can start to see centralized infrastructure in this space as sort of second tier, and we need to start applying the same standards to all the infrastructure that is provided across various protocols and things in the space as we do to the consensus layer for Ethereum. So let's that's a goal for everybody moving forward. Let's try to move in that direction. So if you want to learn more about NodeSet, you can go to nodeset.io. We have a fairly rudimentary website at the moment, but we have a little bit of information there. The biggest and most important thing, if you want to dive deep into NodeSet, is go to docs.nodeset.io. We have tons of information there that tells you what we do, all the different services that we provide. If you have a service that you want from NodeSet, you want to plug into our network, then you can get in contact with us. We have our email address. We have a big Discord community, lots of people there. We have a very active and technical community, so it's very exciting to be a part of that community. If you ever have any questions about running a node, first place usually I tell people to go is EthStaker, but the second place you can go is NodeSet, because we have a lot of great folks there too.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for that. And let me turn it over here to Nixo, that I think is going to share with us some information about a POAP, maybe.
Yes.
Ooh.
So there is a POAP to commemorate this call. If you want the POAP, we're using POAP's new feature called POAP Airship. All you have to do is send at least 0.001 ETH to poap.ethstaker.eth. You can use mainnet, Arbitrum, Base, or Optimism, and you have, I think, like almost 48 hours to do that. It's until September 27th, 11:59 p.m. Eastern time. So definitely more than 24 hours to do it. Send 0.001 ETH to poap.ethstaker.eth. And the cool thing about this new POAP feature about Airship rather than checkout is you don't have to connect your wallet to anything. There is no smart contract. Just send 0.001 ETH. There is no security risk here, which I really like that. I really like this new POAP feature.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And Nixo, any other just closing remarks before we bring today's call to an end?
Nope. Just go check out future calls at ethstaker.eth or ethstaker.cc/events.
All right. Well, Mike, again, it's been a pleasure to have you on today's call, and for all those joining us online in the EthStaker community, thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to hosting one of the future calls in the future here with EthStaker.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Been a real pleasure.
Thanks a lot.